In my sermon on the first morning of Rosh Hashanah, I stated that if ex-Catholic was a denomination, it would be the second largest denomination in the United States. Now, it's technically true that according to Catholic canon law, baptism is indelible. But nevertheless, it's generally accepted that Roman Catholicism is a religion, and if one stops affiliating with that religion, one is no longer Catholic. So the concept of ex-Catholic makes sense. But is there such a thing as an ex-Jew? No, okay. It was a rhetorical question, but I've accustomed people to participating, so that's good. So the most recent decent demographic study of American Jews, which was the Pew study from 2020, reports that 73% of the American Jewish core population are Jews by religion, and 27% are Jews of no religion. Jews of no religion have at least one Jewish parent, they were raised as Jewish, and they say that they are atheist, agnostic, or have no religion, but they still regard themselves as Jewish in some way. Pew excludes from its estimate of the core Jewish population the comparatively small number of people who say they were raised Jewish, have no religion, and do not identify as Jewish in any way. We have data on ex-Catholics, but not on Catholics of no religion, because a Catholic of no religion is no longer a Catholic. But Jew of no religion, at least according to Pew, still regards himself or herself as a Jew, and is probably regarded by most of his or her neighbors as a Jew. But Jews by religion and Jews of no religion do not exhaust the possibilities. There are people who are not considered as part of the core Jewish population, but they're considered as having Jewish affinity. They might be married to a Jew, they might have no formal Jewish affiliation or ancestry, but simply identify with the Jewish community in some way, or they may identify as following both Judaism and another religion. Demographers' definitions of who is a Jew do not always dovetail with halachic definitions, as the Pew study acknowledges. Halakha says that you are a Jew if you are born to a Jewish mother or have converted, and we'll leave aside the question of what is a valid conversion, right? But Reform and Reconstructionist Judaism will consider you Jewish if either parent is Jewish and you identify as a Jew. Neither Pew nor the State of Israel will consider you Jewish if you have converted to a different religion, even though halachically, once you are a Jew, you can never stop being a Jew, right? And thus the chorus of no's when I asked, is there such a thing as an ex-Jew, right? Because according to halakha, there isn't. According to Pew, there is, and according to the State of Israel, there is. Now, demographers and halakha may both want to have very clear definitions and boundaries, but real life isn't always so clear-cut. My brother, for example, blew the shofar in his congregation of which he is a past president on Rosh Hashanah. He attends Kehilat Shalom's minyan over Zoom to say Kaddish when it's the yortzeit of either of our parents, and he occasionally holds a Passover Seder, and he more frequently attends one. But notice that I said my brother blew the shofar at his congregation, not his shul, or his synagogue, or his temple, because my brother belongs to a Unitarian Universalist congregation, which has an active group of Unitarian Universalists for Jewish awareness and holds high holiday services every year. And a few months ago, my brother and I both signed an open letter from Jewish alumni of Georgetown University in support of a Muslim postdoc who'd been arrested by ICE and threatened with deportation. My guess is that Pew would not consider him as part of the core Jewish population, even though he has attended demonstrations for the release of the hostages, and like many of us, has encountered anti-Semitism since October 7th. Jewish identity is messy because we don't fit neatly into the pigeonholes in which society wants to place us. Are we a religion? Yes, but you can be an atheist or an agnostic and still be Jewish. So can you be a Jew and a member of another religion? Yes, if it's Buddhism or Unitarianism, but definitely not if it is Christianity. To the outrage of not only Messianic Jews, but Jews who are married to Christians and they want to have both a baptism and a bris. There's even a word for that, a brisening, right? Or they want to have a first communion and a bar or bat mitzvah for their kids. So is Judaism an ethnicity? Well, yes, except you can't really join an ethnicity, but you can convert and you're fully Jewish. And you can be a Jew even if you're an atheist or an agnostic, but if that describes you, most rabbis will tell you that you can't become a Jew. While in America, we're most often considered a religion, there's actually no word for religion in the Hebrew Bible. Modern Hebrew uses the word dat, which appears only in the book of Esther, and it's a Persian word meaning law. The most common noun applied to the Jewish collective in the Bible is am, people. And in the book of Esther, Haman tells the king that there is an am in his kingdom that does not obey the king's dot. For that matter, we're only called Jews a few times in the Hebrew Bible. Mostly we're called Bnei Yisrael, Israelites. It's only in the late biblical books that we are called Yehudim, Jews, and the word Yehudi means somebody from Judea, right? Judeans, right? Like, you know, if you saw Monty Python's Life of Brian, right? And the rivalry between the People's Front of Judea and the Judean People's Front, right? But Judeans, Jews, Yehudim are people from Judea. It really doesn't have any religious connotation per se. So what we really are is a people. Now, what is a people? Merriam-Webster defines a people as, quote, a body of persons united by a common culture, tradition, or sense of kinship, often constituting a politically organized group, end quote. Another way of describing a group with a sense of kinship is family. In January of 2001, I was part of a group of about 20 conservative rabbis visiting Israel. When we were staying at the Dead Sea, some of us noticed posters for a concert that night by Yehudit Rabitz, an Israeli pop star that many of us were familiar with. That concert was part of a whole event that was put on by Motorola Israel for its workers and their families. So we tried to convince our guide to ask the Motorola people if we could go. But he insisted that it wouldn't work. And he said that the best strategy was simply to show up and try and talk our way in at the door, rather than ask for permission first. So in the end, 5 of us decided that we would give this a shot. 4 of us at that point were in our late 30s or early 40s, and the 5th was the now deceased Rabbi Neil Brief from Chicago, who was in his 60s. And unbeknownst to the rest of us, Rabbi Brief had somehow been handed an invitation to the party by one of the Motorola staff members. So we arrived at the concert, we went to the back door, and we tried to walk in, and the guard stopped us, and he says, "Do you have invitations?" And Rabbi Brief handed him, triumphantly, right, the invitation. And the guard pointed to the rest of us and said, "Zeh bishvilcha, ma'itam." Right? This is for you. What about them? And he pointed to the invitation and says, "Katuv po," it says here, "L'chol hamishpacha." You are invited along with your entire family, right? Now, the guard clearly knew that a 60-something rabbi did not have 4 40-something sons, right? And we did not look particularly alike, but he said, okay, Beseder, okay, and he waved us in, and it was a great concert, open bar, nice food, in a big, comfortable tent by the Dead Sea, courtesy of Motorola Israel. Right? But when he said, "You and your whole family," it wasn't exactly lying, right? There's a sense that all Jews are one family, right? And I think that that shared sensibility, including, from the guard, is what got us into the show. It's this sense of family which is not often easily understood by those who are not part of our community. And sadly, unfortunately, it's sometimes not understood even by those who are part of our community. But as Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove of Park Avenue Synagogue says, "For me, engagement with Israel is a constituent element of modern Jewish identity. To be a Jew means to be engaged with the well-being of the sovereign state of Israel, period." Now, he adds that this does not mean that we're obligated to agree with everything a particular Israeli government does. He says, if the ticket of entry to the Jewish community is assent to the stated policies of the Israeli government, then we will find ourselves with many people opting out, not just of support for Israel, but of engagement with their Jewishness. One of Israel's fiercest internal critics was the novelist Amos Oz, who died about 7 years ago. Oz fought in the 67 Six-Day War, and almost immediately after it ended, he insisted that Israel needed to withdraw from all or most of the territories it conquered during that war. He never wavered in this belief, but he also never ceased to defend the necessity of Israel's existence as the state of the Jews. In his autobiographical A Tale of Love and Darkness, he wrote, "When my father was a young man in Vilna, every wall in Europe said, 'Jews, go home to Palestine.' 50 years later, when he went back to Europe on a visit, the walls all screamed, 'Jews, get out of Palestine.'" Now, Oz strongly supported the creation of a Palestinian state living side by side with the state of Israel. He rejected the desire of the Israeli right wing to occupy the West Bank permanently and to reconquer and resettle Gaza. He feared that if Israel did so and didn't give their residents the vote, Israel would cease to be a democracy and would alienate a huge chunk of its own citizens, most of world Jewry, and the few non-Jewish friends it still had in the world. And if it did give the Palestinian residents the right to vote, it would cease to be a Jewish state. Oz said that what the Israelis and Palestinians needed was not a wedding, but a divorce. The majority of American Jews feel attached to Israel, but each age cohort feels less attached than the cohort above it. And many of you, in fact, I've discussed this with many of you, right? Many of you see this in your own families, right? That, you know, if you're a grandparent, your kids are less attached to Israel than you, and your grandkids less attached than their parents, right? And if that is your sense, data says your sense is accurate, right? 67% of Jews aged 65 and over felt very or somewhat attached to Israel, according to the 2020 Pew study, while of Jews aged 18 to 29, 48% felt very or somewhat attached to Israel, while 51% felt not too attached or not at all attached. And these data are from 2020, before the Netanyahu government's attempt to remake the Israeli judiciary, and before the current war, which, however you assess what happened and what words you think may or may not appropriately use to describe it, it's resulted in way too many deaths of Palestinian civilians, including thousands of children. But I'm not aware of any other situation where the problematic actions of a country's government result in widespread calls for that country itself to be dismantled. I haven't heard anyone say that China should no longer exist because of what it is doing to the Tibetans and the Uyghurs. that Russia should no longer exist because of the invasion of Ukraine, or that the United States shouldn't exist because of the bad actions of our own government throughout our history. Somehow it's only Israel. Those of us who were born to Jewish families and knew our relatives of the immigrant generation, we know the circumstances under which they left the old country and how many relatives did not make it out in time. I know why, because of the vagaries of who could get in where. I have relatives in the United States, Mexico, Australia, South Africa, and Israel. And so there's a commitment that no matter what, there has to be a piece of land on this globe controlled by Jews, where no one can shut the door in our faces if we need to flee. Even if we choose to live elsewhere, there is a sense that Israel is nevertheless home. A home we might not choose to live in, but it is always there as a backup just in case. Amos Oz put it well in explaining why Israel was necessary, but should be viewed as a means to an end and not an end in itself. Here's what he said. I would be more than happy to live in a world composed of dozens of civilizations, each developing in accordance with its own internal rhythm, all cross-pollinating one another without anyone emerging as a nation state. No flag, no emblem, no passport, no anthem, no nothing. Only spiritual civilizations tied somehow to their lands, without the tools of statehood and without the instruments of war. But the Jewish people have already staged a long-running one-man show of that sort. The international audience sometimes applauded, sometimes threw stones, and occasionally slaughtered the actor. No one joined us. No one copied the model the Jews were forced to sustain for 2,000 years, the model of a civilization without the tools of statehood. For me, this drama ended with the murder of Europe's Jews by Hitler. Now, Yom Kippur is in some ways the most individualistic Jewish holiday. Passover and Hanukkah deal with the freedom of the Jewish nation. Sukkot and Shavuot deal with the harvest, which is also more communal than individual. On Yom Kippur, it is our individual failings and successes which stand before God, and yet, even on this individualistic day, our liberty is phrased in the plural. Our liturgy is phrased in the plural, right? It's not for the sin which I have committed, right? Al chet shechatati lefanecha, right? Al chet shechatanu lefanecha, for the sin which we have committed. It's not forgive me, pardon me, grant me atonement. It's forgive us, pardon us, grant us atonement. As Hillel put it, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? I. If I am only for myself, what am I? May we, all of our Jewish family, may we find the right balance between our people's needs and those of others. Gemar Hatima Tova, may we all be inscribed for blessing in the book of life. Amen.